Hello everyone, I'm John Evans, and welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Sam Gore has gone from being the voice of the UNCW Seahawks to working alongside some of the biggest names in sports at ESPN, and he's done it while living and raising a family right here in Wilmington. Sam goes across the country now, doing play-by-play for college sports like volleyball, swimming and diving, and basketball. But Sam's assignments also take him around the world, covering tennis for the network. In fact, Sam had just returned after hosting ESPN studio coverage at Wimbledon when we sat down for our podcast interview.
I can watch it as a fan, mostly because John Isner and Kevin Anderson are actual personal friends of mine and their families. So that's been really fun for me to be able to not pretend to be objective and to actually pull hard for them. Though I love Roger Federer, so that was, but still, I mean, if anybody's going to beat him, it would be Kevin. But I'm still looking at it. I know what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. And so it's interesting to me to see how we're getting on the air and different elements we're bringing into the shows the further we get along. So I can watch it as a fan once they're playing the match, but I still have my, professional thoughts about what's going on.
Yeah. You played the game in high school, so you've been around tennis for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I've played competitively since I was a little boy. I mean, I played junior tennis. I was going to play at University of North Carolina, but I didn't have pro aspirations. And when I was a journalism major, so much of what I did in the broadcast segment, you had to do internships and things outside this. So I continued to play because there's so many kids at Carolina. I went to UNC Chapel Hill that played junior tennis that weren't on the team. I kept playing every week. So when I got out of college, I actually played competitively on the USTA adult circuit. I had a Southern ranking into my when I was 30. And then it's ironic, when I started announcing tennis, the first tennis I ever announced on the professional level was 2001. That's when I stopped playing competitively.
Really?
So now I just hit a lot, but I don't compete. Yeah.
You grew up in the Fayetteville area, right? Terry Sanford High School.
Yeah.
What were your aspirations? I mean, you say you played tennis at a young age.
Yeah.
Was sports what you wanted to do? What were your aspirations growing up?
I was one of those kids that, as I played sports as a youngster, I commentated what I was doing.
Really?
And so I would watch my friends and I would say what was happening. I would commentate it. I was always fascinated with sports announcers. So my brain's just kind of wired that way. I see things and want to comment on it. But when I got out of Chapel Hill, I was a news and sports anchor for about a year and a half in Fayetteville, and realized that at that point in my life, I didn't want to go to a station every day. I was young. I wanted to go out and see the world. I liked calling games. But at that time, there was no ESPNU. There was no sports on the web.
Yeah. It was the flagship.
It was just
that's it, right?
ESPN, ESPN2, the three major networks.
Yeah.
That was it. So you rarely had a network hire someone in their 20s to come work for them. You pretty much had to get older to be a play-by-play person, because the play-by-play person at that time was a more seasoned veteran of the industry. And so that's how I got involved with UNC Wilmington. I just ironically, the person who had been doing the games resigned. I saw the news on WECT in Fayetteville, and Brandon Lancaster, who was a former player, happened to be a personal friend of mine from growing up in Fayetteville. And so I knew a lot of the guys on the team. So I got in touch with Joe Browning and the station. Yeah. They interviewed me. One thing led to another. I got the job simply because when they came in to audition me, I already knew the names of the players on the team.
Yeah.
So I became the voice of the Seahawks, got into the insurance business to support myself. So I worked for an insurance company that insured auto dealerships all over the country. So I didn't have to go to an office every day. I just traveled. As long as I met my numbers and took care of our clients, I could do whatever I want. So I started as the voice of the Seahawks, and then one thing led to another, and I got into TV. And, it's like this business is so fraternal in that person that was just like an assistant on one of our productions eventually became what's called a coordinating producer at ESPN. The coordinating producers are those people that are responsible for individual sports. And they asked me if I'd like to do all of ESPN International's tennis. So when you go outside the U.S., ESPN broadcasts in other languages, and they have a whole other English broadcast as well. So that allowed me to quit the insurance business, and I became a ESPN International tennis announcer. And then after I'd done that for about a year is when cable sports exploded. Yeah. And so I was, that was ESPNU was put in my contract. All of the, which eventually became then there was SEC Network, there's Longhorn Network, now there's going to be the ACC Network. And I just kept moving up the food chain within ESPN to where I'm doing domestic television across all sports. So.
What did you learn at UNCW and that job that really kind of groomed you to do this? I mean, you like sports, and I just talked to Todd Lewis last week. He said, he played golf, but when he went to start covering golf, it was an entire new, everybody else had a PhD and he had a high school diploma. When you were at UNCW, you were a sports fan, but what did that teach you, that job there?
Well, I think the biggest thing I learned as the voice of the Seahawks was work ethic. And honestly, it had nothing to do with broadcasting. It had everything to do with the people that I was around. I have never seen a human being work as hard as Joe Browning. Now he's called media relations. Back then he was called sports information director. Kevin Eastman was the head basketball coach at the time. The film sessions they would go to, seeing Joe when we'd get on the bus after a game, immediately start working on notes for way out in the future. The discipline and the work ethic that at that point in my life coming out of college really helped me to implement that into preparing for games. And so I think that the UNCW portion of my career really set the stage for my work ethic to prepare for games, gather information, how to, if you're not getting what you need, find it somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
And this was before Google.
Yes.
You had
this is when you had to have media guides mailed to you, when you'd have to pick up the phone and call someone and say, let's go down your roster. Mm-hmm. I can remember traveling with a little portable typewriter. There was I didn't have there was no laptop then
either.
No
iPads, nothing.
So it was really seeing these guys work as hard as they did kind of form within me a desire as well as a ability to do it with what I love doing, which is broadcasting.
Yeah, and
I've always been a storyteller, so I like to gather as much information on an athlete to be able then to present it to people.
Yeah, and you were at UNCW, and you've kept your home here, and you've kept your home base here. Why? What lured you to southeastern North Carolina that you loved it so much?
Well, when you grow up in Fayetteville, you either want to live in the mountains or the beach. And I love the beach. So ESPN, fortunately, when you're a play-by-play announcer, I'm an employee of ESPN, but they allow us to live wherever we want to live, and then I basically just fly to my assignments. My wife and I have looked at living in other places. She's from Texas, and I've always loved Florida. I like to go home to a warm place. But every time we've gotten close to thinking we're actually going to do this, we've realized what a good situation we have here in Wilmington. The quality of life here is fantastic. For example, very early in our marriage, we set a tradition because of how much I was traveling to make sure we stayed committed to a date night every week. This is when our kids were little. And so we just laughed because in Wilmington, we could leave our house at 5:30, be at any restaurant in town. Now, granted, not down at the beach or something like that, but where we like to eat. And you learn when you live here where to go and where not to go.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So we could leave at 5:30, be at any restaurant in town, have a fantastic dinner, make a 7 o'clock movie in time for them to pop fresh popcorn, see the previews, and be home by 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Whereas as I'm traveling around the world, and especially in the United States, you just don't have that. You have to worry about, well, how long is it going to take us to get to this restaurant? Can we get a table? How's the traffic going to be to get to the theater? Is it going to be sold out? We need to pick our seats. There's just all these things that add stress to a night out that we don't really deal with here in Wilmington. So I've just always loved the beach. I've loved the people here. These are, this is my home, North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, I've been here 26 years, and I've had a difficult time finding any place that's any better.
Yeah.
We've raised our kids here. I've been blessed that, the TV stations haven't locked me out and changed the door code on me. But like you, did there come a time where family played a higher role in that want to move? Because to me, some of the earliest sports directors I ever worked with were divorced with kids because they had moved 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And I got to the point where when the kids were a certain age, I didn't want to do that to them.
Yeah.
My family life became that priority because of what I had seen. Did there ever come a time where that was like that with you?
My family life is definitely my priority. I'm always looking for ways to take my family to wherever I'm working. However, I have to say ESPN has never come to me and said, we'd really like for you to move to this place or that place. So I have not had to make that decision over the course of my career. If we moved, it would purely be because we wanted to move, because they'll allow us to live where we want.
Who were some of your earliest influences? I know some of the early tennis you did. Cliff Drysdale was a big influence.
Still work
on
with
you.
Cliff. Cliff was at Wimbledon this week.
Yeah. But what about the other influences? Who else helped you along the way that you would say, if I had a top 5 of people who really helped me along the way, these people would be on it?
Well, in terms of progressing my career, there's some people at ESPN that you probably wouldn't know of. But locally, I would say, as I mentioned, the UNCW basketball family, Joe Browning, Kevin Eastman, Jerry Wainwright, Brad Brownell, they were all very instrumental in encouraging me. Doors at network television that have opened, a guy who used to live here named Dick Klein, who was an NBC director. He opened a lot of doors for me. Bob Rosberg, Rossi,
his son lived here, didn't
Austin,
he?
Austin. And Rossi was a huge influence for me. He connected me to so many people within the television network sports world that then panned out to lots of opportunities for me. So locally, those were big influences for me, and I hope I'm not leaving anybody out.
I'm just curious because I know Cliff was,
and Cliff obviously, Cliff has obviously been very good to me. And it's funny because this year in Australia, it was the first time that Cliff and I have ever been on ESPN together.
Really, after all these years?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked on the same productions and stuff, but they've never put us on the set together. I'm studio hosting in Australia in Wimbledon, and Cliff opened the show with me. And it was I hadn't thought about it until I was going in that morning, and I was pretty emotional about it. I was like, this is a huge day for me, because everywhere I go, when I come home to Wilmington, one of the most common questions I get asked is, how's Cliff Drysdale doing? How's Cliffy?
Yeah.
And I said, this is going to mean so much to so many people that we share in common as loved ones in Wilmington. And it means a tremendous amount to me, because Cliff was always very encouraging of me. He's an analyst and a play-by-play guy. I'm strictly a play-by-play guy. But he never looked down on me. He never discouraged me. I mean, I used to play tennis with him. I mean, just hearing Cliff Drysdale stories and then finally getting the chance to work with him as an equal was a dream come true.
It was, that was, I can remember when I met him, when he lived here so many years and helped organize the benefits over at Landfall, some of the Landfall legends. And that's where I had met him the first couple of times. And just after listening to him for so many years, call the biggest matches that ever happened, and then meeting the man, it was just like you. It's a thrill just to be be in his presence, really, when you're in that industry.
Cliff's a Hall of Famer now, but it's interesting because every time we get together, and I'm with him several times a year, one of the first questions he asks me is, tell me what's going on in Wilmington. How is this place? How is that place? Nice. How are these people? He remembers everyone here. He ask tons of Wilmington questions. Wilmington holds a very special place in Cliff's heart, and he is just, his accent, his voice is magical. Rod Laver, the great champion, once said that Cliff Drysdale could talk a lion into becoming a vegetarian. So
he did, and he's just a class guy. You knew tennis, played tennis,
Yes.
but when you got into some of these other sports, volleyball, you started doing tennis, you started doing gymnastics on the radio. That's not easy. And learning some of these to the point where you're comfortable commentating on them had to be difficult as well.
Yeah, again, that kind of gets back to just how my brain's wired. I mean, for me, seeing a guy come over and fix our sink or install a door or some sort of thing like that blows my mind. Like, how do you do this? Work on a car. For me, I think we all just have natural gifts and abilities that God gives us that we just can do. And for me, I have always, with that work ethic, again, this gets back to the work ethic, I always embraced a new sport, and I would always go to people in that sport to immediately begin learning it and finding out what not to say, what I actually needed to know. Fortunately for me, the only thing I've had to do on radio that I didn't know, well, I did know it because I did gymnastics college gymnastics on television, but then NBC asked me to come do the gymnastics on the radio for the Rio Olympic Games, and they had not done it before. So I couldn't really screw it up because no one had done it before. But anyway, that's the kind of sport where actually the analyst is doing most of the talking, and I'm just leading you up to here's Simone Biles, blah, 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 blah. And then the analyst takes you through the routine. I may say she's at the left corner, going to the right. So that was, but it was fun. But I have been asked to do a lot of sports that I knew nothing about growing up. Women's college volleyball is probably my favorite outside of the traditional sports like basketball and tennis that I knew growing up. But I had to learn the sport. I've had to do bull riding. I've had to learn that sport. I was going to ask
you about that here in a little bit.
I mean, there's just a lot of sports, but it's, to me, I embrace that challenge and I love it. And my goal is to, when I get a new sport, to when I go on the air, to not sound like it's the first time I've ever announced it.
And you know, I've told you many times that I think you're just one of the best I've ever heard, on top of being a good guy and a good family man.
Well, thanks.
Let's talk about the professional bull riding, because
PBR.
Your wife is from Texas, and actually I read an article that she helped you along the way a little bit, get ingrained to the sport, and when you started that about 10 years ago.
There's probably been no other sport that I've been asked to do that excited my wife more than when I told her, honey, the PBR, the Professional Bull Riding Tour, has asked me to commentate bull riding, and I don't know the first thing about it. Well, rodeo was an actual high school sport where she grew up in Texas. Now, that kind of bull riding is different than the Pro Tour. But it was, she really helped me with the terminology, with a lot of, little nuances of the sport that then once I got into it, I learned it. And, to this day, if the guy who does play-by-play, his name's Craig Hummer, if he has an issue, they call me. But it's such a good gig, so to speak, he tries never to have an issue. So I haven't done it in a while, but it's a fascinating sport. The guy I worked with was actually married to the singer Jewel, and he was like a bull riding legend. So it was pretty cool. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. But I read a comment that you said I went to J.W. Hart and said, I can do play-by-play, but I need the knowledge. I need you to tell me what to say. I need you to tell me what to say, and I need you to educate me. Have you taken every assignment or every sport, whether it be gymnastics, volleyball, at the beginning, and approached it the same way?
Yes, pretty much. I mean, that's you learn in this business, especially when you're young and getting started, never turn down an offer.
Right.
Before ESPN made announcers employees, you were still working on an independent contractor basis. And so at that point, if they said, hey, can you do women's lacrosse? Oh, yeah, I love women's lacrosse. Sure, I can do it. Oh my gosh, I got to learn women's lacrosse. But I knew I had enough confidence in myself that I would put forth the effort to learn it by the time I got to do it. And it's just like an attorney studying for a case, or a physician studying, a surgeon studying for a procedure. Once you get to that trial or to that surgical procedure, even if it's the first time you've tried that type of case or performed that procedure, you know you're going to be ready because you have to be.
Has there been a time, or was there a moment in your career where you may have sat back over a cup of coffee in the morning or after working out, because I know you're a workout nut, and just said, man, look what I've accomplished and look where I am?
You know, I have had several moments like that, and it's interesting because I'm a person of deep faith.
I know you are. And I'm going to ask you about that later, too. So
I've always believed that God has opened doors for me that I could never open myself. I get kind of emotional because I remember last week we were in a production meeting at Wimbledon, and I'm sitting in this production meeting, and I'm looking around the room at Chris Fowler, who everyone knows in college football, John McEnroe, Chris Everett, Darren Cahill, Brad Gilbert, Pam Shriver, Mary Jo Fernandez, I think I mentioned Patrick McEnroe, all of Cliff Drysdale, all of these legends in the sport and in the industry, Chris McKendry, and I'm like, I cannot believe I'm here. I mean, do they realize it's me? I've never lost that sense of, yes, I have certain talents and abilities but because of my faith, I feel like God has given a gift to me, and it's up to me to develop that gift.
Right.
And so, yes, I still to this day have pinch me moments and don't assume I've made it, or that, hey, look how where I am because of me. I just feel very grateful and thankful to God, and also, and I mean that when I say that. A lot of people say, God. Right. But I actually have a daily relationship with him, and so I'm thankful for him as my dad. And all the people that I feel like he's put in my life, whether they knew it or not, that opened doors for me that I never could have opened myself, because I do realize, even though I have these opportunities, there's honestly, John, there's probably thousands of other people that could do it too. But for whatever reason, here I am, and I'm going to honor that.
Where does your faith come from? How did it get so deep?
You know, it's interesting because a lot of people will tell you about the families they had and the things that were instilled to them. But I mean, my family has since developed their own faith, but I can just remember as a child always being very intrigued by God and spiritual things. And then I can remember a moment when I was probably about, I don't know, maybe 10 years old, and I had been given a Bible that just sat on my shelf. And I can remember the moment I felt prompted to just open it up. And once I started reading it, I was just fascinated with it. And I've never approached my faith as something that I need to try to convince other people unnaturally to believe in. I've never tried to force it on people, because I consider myself an actual follower of Jesus Christ. So that's not it doesn't come with any political agenda. It doesn't even come with any spiritual agenda, other than to walk with God every day, and whatever he puts in front of me, I try to approach as he would.
We're back in a moment with the second part of our interview with ESPN's Sam Gore. But first, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And secondly, please leave us a rating or a review. The more of those we have, the more recommendations we'll get to possibly bring in some new listeners. So thanks for doing that if you can. Now back to our interview, where I asked Sam that with all of the traveling that he's done and continues to do, how important his wife Julie is to his career and the success of his family.
Actually, one of the blessings, before I get into her as a person, is just the fact that she's as big a sports fan as I am, if not bigger. To this day, during August through December, wherever I am on a weekend, if I'm not home on a Saturday, I have to comprise a list of all the college football games and what network they're on so that she can stay home on Saturday, and she watches college football from noon till bedtime.
Really?
Every Saturday. She grew up in Texas. Well, you know, the Texas cheerleaders showed up at her elementary school to indoctrinate them into Longhorn football.
Yeah.
She has a passion for college football, which has led to other sports as well, especially tennis and some other things. So first of all, my wife is a sports fan. So it's never like, you know, a lot of my friends are married, and a lot of women I know are married to guys that could care less about sports. Right. So if they want to watch it, it's almost like a privilege that they get to see it. Or for me, my wife will say, what games are on tonight? You know, what's on? What can we watch? So first of all, that's a big benefit. And then secondly, Julie has just, she's one of these types of people that when you meet her, you feel like she makes you feel like you're the most special person in the world to her right now. She's a hospice social worker. That gives you an idea of her type of personality. Yeah. So she has this angelic quality, which for those of us in television who like to be affirmed all the time and, you know, hey, you're doing a great job and you look good.
I hope my wife is listening, because I could use some of that.
That combination was just like my dream woman. Oh, my gosh. She actually thinks I'm pretty cool, and she listens to my games, and she knows the lingo. And so Julie was very good at loving sports and supporting my career. In fact, before I got into network television, I was working for the insurance company and doing the voice of the Seahawks. And Cliff Drysdale had asked me to do TV for their Legends event one year. And I can remember when that weekend ended, and I came home, and she's like, what's wrong? And I said, well, I just realized that it's over. And I was doing what I love to do for a whole weekend, and I don't know if I'll ever get to do it again. And I'm just wondering if it's even worth it to continue to hold on to this dream, because obviously I don't know if it's going to work out. I mean, I want to be a network television announcer. How in the world is that going to happen? And she's the one that said, I honestly believe it's going to happen for you. And she kept me positive. She kept me encouraged. Oh. And so she's always been the person from my career perspective that's held the ladder. She's always been the rock. And she will tell me when she doesn't like something that I'm doing on the air, and she'll tell me that I do.
Do you get the text as it's happening?
You know, like even at in Wimbledon, one day she said she saw a clip. I was doing a piece with Tom Rinaldi, who's an ESPN sports writer.
I watched that same piece.
And so I'm like, hey, what'd you think? And because for me, that was another Pinchme moment. Yeah. Tom Rinaldi's one of the few people on this earth that I can cry just hearing his voice. So I was just on top of the world. I just did this piece with Tom Rinaldi. It's amazing. So I sent her the clip, and I said, what do you think? Knowing I'd get an honest response back, but pretty sure she was that I nailed it. She was going to like this one. Yeah. She's like, great piece, but you need to unbutton your jacket. So she was watching the piece, or maybe it was I needed to button my jacket. But anyway, she was looking at that type of detail because whatever my jacket was doing, she didn't know. And she was absolutely right. Yeah. And actually, I can remember that I had the same inclination, but our audio guy, the way he had positioned the microphone, it had to be done that way. But, you know, so she doesn't just tell me, wow, you're doing great. She gives it to me straight.
What was becoming a granddad like?
Well, full disclosure, I'm not a biological grandfather, but our niece, basically, we played a big part in raising her. She's from Texas as well. So she and her brother would come live with us in the summers, and she actually did live here for a long time. So she's like a daughter to me, but I don't want to take away from my own kids and say...
Well, I saw you scoping out...
Because when we went, the reason you're asking me this is because a few weeks ago, it was actually in June, after the baby was born, we went up to Boston to visit her and her husband, and we got there, and of course, you know, my wife just assumed she's grandmother. She's one of Shanna's mothers, and I hadn't really thought that much about it. And Shanna looked at me and she says, okay, so what's your grandfather name?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I just had this whole flood of emotion, like, oh my gosh, she really considers me to be one of the grandfathers of this child. And so that's where that came from. But it is still a magical feeling. And in fact, they're coming to visit next week, and I cannot wait to get my hands on that baby. I've always said I couldn't wait to be a grandfather because then I could spoil them and give them back. And then say to my kids, see what you put me through?
Yeah. As my kids got older, my relationship with them changed. Mm-hmm. My kids are now getting ready to be 30 and 28 and 24. Your kids are older now. Yep. How is your relationship with them now? That, you know, Dad may have been the voice of the Seahawks when they were younger. Dad may have been on TV when they're younger. And when my kids were younger, I would go in and have lunch with them at Holly Tree or whatever it was, and their friends wanted to sit with us at lunch. Yeah. Dad being on TV was kind of cool. But now that your kids are older, what's your relationship like with them when you get a chance to see them? Has it changed?
You know, it obviously changes over the course of their childhood because you, first of all, when they're younger, and especially in their teen years, you're trying to raise them as best you can to become productive adults. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I've found that no matter how hard you say, I'm not going to be like my parents, there's this natural DNA that we have to override, that we tend to default to the faults of our parents, the strengths of our parents. And so, you know, getting through those teenage years was rough. Really tough, because your love is motivated by discipline and trying to correct and show them the way. And then as they start to get through that, all of a sudden you do take on this role of more of an advisor and a friend and a person to lean on. Mm-hmm. And so I have enjoyed so much the older two right now because they're past all of my responsibility or the way I perceived it. Now our youngest is 17. Right. And so we're in the midst of that battle where he's trying to become a man and I'm trying to make sure he's becoming an adult. Right. So we run into those problems, but the lessons I've learned from the older two have definitely benefited our youngest who's 17. So I love kids to begin with. But one thing, mentioning the kids as well, they've never been that enamored by what I do. In fact, sometimes they don't even know where I am or what I'm doing, or their friends will say, hey, I saw your dad on TV last night. Oh, where was it? Yeah. So it's not that we don't talk or have a relationship. It's just when I call home or when we do talk, it's not about what I'm doing. It's about your homework or what are we doing this weekend, or it's just regular family stuff. Yeah.
I'm lucky enough that I have a regular anchor, or co-anchor rather, excuse me. At 6 o'clock and 11, it's Francis. Yep. At 10 o'clock, it's Ashley. We've worked together now for several years to the point where we know each other. And when one stops, the other can kind of pick up. Where you go, I'm just going to tell you, the first 3 minutes I went online, I found some of your partners, Jimmy Arias, Holly McPeak, J.W. Hart, Bruce Pearl, Marty Fish, Luke Jensen, Pam Shriver. It's almost like every time people see Sam, they see someone else different next to you. Difficult, more difficult than it would be with a Dick Enberg, Al McGuire kind of a partnership everywhere you go?
No, I mean, that's just pretty much the nature of our business right now. And ESPN does an excellent job of hiring analysts. By the time most of those very accomplished former athletes and coaches get to me, they're past all of their athletic career and their coaching career, and they want to learn a new career. So they're asking me a lot of questions. They're very interested in what I'm doing. They're very into the whole TV world. Some of those names that you mentioned have become dear friends of mine. Jimmy Arias is one of my best friends in life. His children and my kids have grown up together. Our wives are friends, and it's because we spent about 14 years in Bristol, Connecticut doing all those tennis events together. Yeah. And we would it was just he and I spending weeks on end. So we became great friends. You know, I do typically have the same. ESPN's sort of moving to giving you the same partner or same core of people on a certain sport. So, for example, in women's volleyball, you mentioned Holly McPeak.
Right, yeah.
I do work with Holly fairly regularly, but Dane Blanton is a guy that I'm traditionally paired with. Tennis, you're just constantly moving in and out of different analysts based on the match or based on the responsibility.
Yeah.
But that's just the challenge of what I do, is sizing someone up, their personality, and figuring out how to get what they know out onto the air. And so a lot of times I see my role as a play-by-play person as like a point guard. I'm not the focal point in my mind of the show. I'm the guy who is the representative of the viewer at home.
Right.
And so it's up to me to ask these people questions that people at home want to know. So I will usually sit down with someone I've never worked with before and say, okay, what do you like to talk about? You know, if there's something you want to discuss and you can't figure out how to get there, send me a little note, write me a little note, ask me about so-and-so, or tell me on the commercial break, because I want to make you look and sound good. You're the expert.
Yeah, and that makes the team better, and the viewers experience better when it comes to that.
Right.
Are you starstruck at all anymore by anybody who you may come across in some, especially, I mean, you were in Wimbledon, just got back from Wimbledon. Are you starstruck by any of the big names or any of the major stars?
Oh, sure. I mean, I don't show it.
No, you can't as a.
But it is.
Yeah.
It's like I told you. I've never lost that sense of awe and thankfulness of what I'm privileged to do. So when I am sitting in the player dining room at the U.S. Open, and Roger Federer comes by and says hello, or Rafa Nadal is next to me with his family, and they're having lunch, it blows my mind. Yeah, I'm thinking, there's so many people that would give so much money just to be here right now. So, yes, there's still the big athletes, even at ESPN, just the domestic tennis announcers that I work with. I mean, I'm still starstruck by all the John and Chrissy and a lot of the former champions that I get to work with. But it's a different type of starstruck. It's not the kind of starstruck that puts them on a pedestal other than just what they accomplished in their sport. It's and I'm I'm friends with them generally, so it's different. But if I really peeled back the layers, I'd say, wow, this is so cool. Yeah. That cool factor's never been lost on me.
You were asked to go back in 2012 as part of the Distinguished Speaker Series at Terry Sanford High School.
Yeah.
When you get asked something like that, what does that mean to someone who obviously values where they grew up and how hard they've worked to get where they are? But what was that to you as far as being an honor?
Well, my first reaction was, me? Are you sure? And then, I basically thought, okay, well, I was those kids at one point. What have I learned that I can impart to them? So I see it more of as a mission to go in and say, here's what I've learned about being successful. Here's what I've learned through my failures, and here's what I've learned through my successes. But it meant a great deal to me to go back to my high school and be able to come back and relive the halls that I walked and see the restaurants I used to eat in, and then, talk to kids that were just like me when I was sitting exactly where they were.
You don't have your to-do list is put away. You don't have anything to do for a week. What does Sam Gore do to relax or to enjoy his own time?
Well, I work out. I have never been a person that sees going to the gym as something I have to do. I love to be active. So if I have a week off, I am going to be at O2 Fitness, lifting, taking a spin class. I will go for a walk that afternoon. But, generally speaking, when I'm home, I love to go to dinner with my wife and my family. I love to cook for everybody. I love movies. I'm a huge movie nut, because I travel so much. So we go to movies a lot. Pretty traditional stuff. I just really embrace being home. when I'm home. You know, home
Yeah.
for me is a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
So just sitting in a room with my dogs and my kids and my wife and just, you know, running errands and doing normal stuff. It's just, when I'm off for a week, that's pretty much what I'm doing.
It is fun to be around someone like you who has worked, I mean, genuinely worked to get where they've been. And it's fun also to see, you know, follow you on Facebook and to see you really have a genuine joy in celebrating others' successes, whether it's your kids, whether it's family or friends, and you do that all the time.
Well, I feel like that kind of gets back to my personal faith, because I believe that, you know, God's got me. It's clear. He's taken me places I could never go. So therefore, I am truly happy for other people, because they're not a threat to me. If another guy gets a position at ESPN I wanted, that's okay. Mm-hmm. I'm happy for that person. But I do embrace what I do, John, because it's a dream come true for me. I can remember when I first started working for ESPN, and when we would sign off the air, up until a few years ago, we would always say, "This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports. For more, log on to ESPN.com." And I would get like a lump in my throat every time I'd say it. And I'd say it 100 times a year. But it still was just, I'm like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to say this. Yeah. This is amazing. So I love what I do, and I don't see that my purpose really doesn't have anything to do with what I do. I feel like I see things more of it from an eternal perspective. And so, yeah, I celebrate life and I celebrate others' lives. I love seeing other people, having fantastic moments. It
is, I could have spent this 35 or 40 minutes just talking about tennis or athletics. But I feel like I wanted to get to know a little bit more of you. We've known each other now for 25, 26 years, and I never really have had this kind of conversation with you. I've had basketball conversations. Yeah. I've had all kinds. But it was really nice of you to kind of let me peel back those layers a little bit and let me see what is important to you.
Well, it's the joke in my family is, like, when we go to a movie and there's a inspirational scene, everybody leans over and looks at me to see if I'm crying. As I've gotten older, I cry all the time now. It's like I can't help it. But happy things. Like, I don't cry over sad things as much as I cry over inspirational and happy things.
Andy Murray's victory at 2013, you cried at.
Yeah, I sure did. That was just, an amazing accomplishment. I was so happy for the people of Great Britain that they finally had their champion that they wanted so desperately. So yeah, I do. I cry pretty easily, but I'm happy with, I love what I do. I love my family, and I just, I really try to embrace life. Now, there's a lot of bad days. There's a lot of adversity and struggles that I've had to deal with, but I deal with all those things. My life is in no way perfect. I am in no way perfect. I have huge flaws, but I'm always trying to correct those flaws. I'm never happy with, some people will just say, well, that's just me. Mm-hmm. I'm never happy with just me. I always want to be the best version of me for those around me that I can. And so because of this kind of eternal perspective I have, that we're put on this earth for just a temporary amount of time in order to prepare us for our next life, I, just kind of get through those tough moments maybe easier than other people do.
If you don't mind sharing, what's a struggle? What is one struggle that you've overcome?
Well, I think one thing that I had to overcome was I came from a broken home. So my parents were divorced and my dad was still involved in my life. But I was basically raised by my mother, my great-grandmother, and my grandmother. Well, when you're an ambitious young person, I was very outgoing. I was student body president. I was always involved in social clubs and sports. When you're that age and you don't have a father kind of, I don't know what the right word was, but have that discipline every day from a dad. Now, this is just me. what happened was I went through my teenage years and then out of college, raised by these very strong women who did nothing but shower me with unconditional love. And you say, well, what's wrong with that? Nothing. But the problem with that was I reached getting to adulthood and being married without learning how to give unconditional love. Yes, I was a follower of Jesus. Yes, I have this tremendous deep faith in God. But that gets back to your human DNA. I had never really learned how to give unconditional love. I just assumed that, if you love me, then we're going to do what I want to do. And what I want to do is fun and great. So it's not like I'm trying to get you to do bad things or things that aren't going to be fun. So I really had to learn as an adult, especially when I got married to Julie, how to be selfless and how to give unconditional love as opposed to, receive unconditional love. So that was one of the challenges I had, was rewiring my brain to implement my faith. And when I say I follow Jesus, well, that's what he did. He gave himself, regardless of what faith you come from. You have to look at the life of Jesus and say he gave himself. He wasn't judging, he was giving. He was sacrificing himself and teaching us to do the same thing. So that's where the way I was raised kind of conflicted with the faith I had, and I had to learn to let my faith override that natural self. Until now, I feel like I'm pretty good at it.
But that's part of the partnership.
But yeah, that was part of the struggle. And then,
but that's part of the partnership between a husband and a wife.
Exactly. Yeah. And, my wife had to, confront me about it. And fortunately, I responded with, okay, I'm not going to be, you're right. I'm not going to be how I used to be, but it was not because I was trying to be bad, and it was just because I didn't know any better.
Some help along the way.
So, and the other thing I think also in this business that we're in is, for all the success you see, there was a lot of rejection. There's a lot of not getting what you want and not being able to do what you're able to do. And so that's was always a big challenge for me until I reached a certain stage where I realized all of that fretting and all that worrying and all that angst didn't matter. It was it's gonna work out how it's supposed to work out.
Yeah. What's next? Where do you go? As we tape this, Wimbledon is in its final days, but where's Sam going next?
I'm doing 3 world team tennis matches in Washington, D.C. next week. That's for Billie Jean King's tennis league that she's had since the 70s. And that's just something I do on a freelance basis that I'm allowed to do. And then I dive right into ESPN summer tennis. So I'll be doing the U.S. Open Series events in Atlanta, San Jose, Cincinnati, Winston-Salem, and then the U.S. Open in New York. And from there, when the U.S. Open's over, I go into college sports. So I usually, the way ESPN schedules announcers, if you can't start a season, you don't do that sport. So that's why you don't see me doing college football. Many years ago, our coordinating producer from college football said, Sam, I can put you in the football roster and give you a mediocre football game, not a set package throughout the season, or you can be my primary women's college volleyball announcer, and you'll do the biggest of the matches. You'll do the NCAA tournament. You can do 2 a week, so you end up making, at that time, you got paid per, now I'm on a salary, but you got paid per game. You end up making what you do for one football game because you can do 2 volleyball matches a week. So I said, sign me up. Yeah. And it's been the best move I ever made. So when U.S. Open's over, I jump into all of the college sports I do, usually women's college volleyball, and they'll supplement it with some swimming and diving. And then I start college basketball usually in December. I go to Australia in January in the midst of college basketball. And then inevitably I'm kind of, one of ESPN calls me the utility guy. So where there's a need, I'll get the call. Yeah. So.
Well, cool. It's been a joy to have you in here.
Well,
and
thanks,
it really
John.
has been a neat conversation. And we wish you all the best. And as we both kind of navigate these years and doing what we both love to do, I do wish you nothing but the best as you move forward.
Well, thank you. WECT has been in my life my entire life. I grew up in Fayetteville. We got WECT. I used to watch Wayne Jackson. And then that was another great moment for me. I ended up working with him.
Yeah.
From, many, many years of
Yeah.
WECT anchors and knowing you at, the other station and now this one. It's a thrill for me to come back here and get to talk to someone locally about the place that I love. Wilmington is part of me and forever will be.
Thank you, buddy.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Sam Gore is a good man. I'd like to thank him for spending some time with us here on the podcast. Don't forget, you'll be catching Sam on some of those college sports broadcasts soon as those sports seasons get ready to ramp up once again. You can also find him on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Say hi to him on any of those platforms. Next week, Kimberly Lawrence will join us. She's right now trying to defend her title as the strongest woman in the world, while at the same time trying to grow the popularity of that sport.
Society doesn't necessarily want to see the biggest girls up on the stage. They want to see lean, strong girls. Because, it's TV. They're harsh. It's that type of world. Mm-hmm. For the men, the bigger the better. Mm-hmm. For females, it doesn't advertise as well. It's just kind of like you go ahead and you start hearing the steroid jokes. You start hearing I wonder what she's doing. No, it's hard to build up a sport when that's what's being portrayed.
Right.
Someone like me being portrayed, you're not going to say that about me because I don't. I don't look like that. I don't act like that.
That's Kimberly Lawrence, aiming to defend as the strongest woman in the world next week, right here on our podcast. Hey, do you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode? Please let me know who it is. Send me an email, jevans@wect.com. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One on One.